Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Techstrong Learning Experience brought to you by Mirantis. My name is Jared Harris, and I'll be your host for today's discussion. But before we get this exciting panel going, I do have a few housekeeping notes for you. Today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any of the discussion, or if you'd like to share with a friend, or you just want to watch the on-demand at your leisure later, go ahead and click the link once it comes to you by email, and you'll have access to that, and you can share it around. If you have any questions, we'd like you to submit them using the Q&A tab on the right side of your screen. This is also where you will find the chat tab, where you can engage with today's speaker or the other audience members. Share your thoughts with us, or you can just tell us where you're tuning in from. We also have handouts on the right side of your screen. Click that and you'll be able to follow along with the presentation. And then finally, at the conclusion of today's program, we have 4 $25 gift cards, so be sure to stick around for the duration of the program to find out if you are a winner. Let's go ahead and kick off today's topic: accelerate application delivery on Kubernetes by 5 times. Zach Fennell, he is our speaker for today. He is the Senior Solutions Architect at Mirantis. Zach, go ahead and take it away from here, and I'll be turning off my camera and coming back on for any questions. If you need any help, I'll be here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jared, for the introduction. Hello, everybody. My name is Zach Finelli. I'm a Senior Solutions Architect here with Mirantis. Just a little bit about Mirantis and myself. So Mirantis, who we are is we acquired the Docker, the enterprise portions of Docker. And what we do is we build, we enterprise open source and use this for organizations out there that want to use open source as a foundation for their technical infrastructure. So we help our customers do containerization and cloud native apps, right? So whether that be containerizing applications, we provide an enterprise container platform built on open source, batteries included, but swappable. So all the enterprise configurations that you're looking for. And we also provide all the services around that, but that's generally geared towards helping customers do this new ecosystem out there correctly and be able to do it with the enterprise. So, and who I am is I'm on the solutions architecture team. So we get to observe and work with a bunch of customers on all of their helping them reach their goals with Kubernetes. So I help provide solutions and listen in on our customers' problems and draft solutions for them and help them be able to come up to something that would be able to fit all their problems. So, but prior to that, just a little bit about myself is I'm from New Jersey, and I have a background in the before coming to Mirantis, I have a background in the consulting space, and I consulted and advised commercial organizations in the software engineering space. So whether that's helping them sharpen their software engineering teams, develop and modernize applications, educate on the latest architectures, or help make strategic decisions. So that's what I did prior to coming to Mirantis. And right around then, Kubernetes just started coming up. So I got to see a little bit about how organizations, a lot of their common challenges with Kubernetes. I got to see that firsthand with many different types of organizations. So today we're going to be talking about how to accelerate Kubernetes application delivery on Kubernetes, and what that actually entails. Like, what does it mean to actually adopt Kubernetes? And typically what we see out there is Kubernetes and containers have a very steep learning curve, and getting beyond that. So it's one thing to actually learn it and get it in development. That's hard enough on its own, but to be able to enterprise it and be able to do it and operationalize it, that's a big challenge. So we're going to be talking about what goes into that and what you need in sort of an operational environment, and ways that, and also ways that we've helped, and things that you can do. So we'll be talking a lot about that today. And we'll be talking about how to reduce complications with that, with the whole new Kubernetes ecosystem that you have out there. So So just having what I observed, most organizations, big and small, they're having a lot of challenges with Kubernetes. And this right now, it slows down productivity. And but given all those challenges, like it could take a lot. You need to get your engineering teams, you need to get your educated, you need your operations teams ready. So there's a lot that goes into that. We're going to unpack that a little later today. But let's just before we talk about that, given all the challenges and years and all the resources, like given all this, like why do we see, just briefly, like why do we see uh, uh, well, before we jump into that, let's talk about what we're going to talk about just briefly today. So we're going to talk a little bit about the state of cloud native and DevOps, what that looks like. I was just about to get into some of the problems that like organizations are having in Kubernetes and why like they're going through these to be able to like what are they getting out of Kubernetes and why are they going through all these challenges and what are they expecting to get. We'll be talking about a little bit about solutions and what goes into a Kubernetes ecosystem, especially a production ready one. And then we'll be talking a little bit about later on Lens Autopilot and what that is and how we found a solution to be able to help with that. So, and feel free to chime in with any questions. We'll be happy to answer them, and we'll be happy to answer them at the end as well. So let's go into the state of cloud native. So as we can see, these are pretty big numbers out there. I believe this number right here, these numbers that we're seeing right here are from Gartner, and 89%, that's a pretty high adoption rate for Kubernetes. And we'll be talking about a little bit about why organizations are moving into that just briefly, but it's a little more than a containerization. Like you go on their website and you'll see it's they call it a containerization orchestrator. It's a lot more than that, and we'll be talking about why that is and what it gives. So 89%, that's a pretty large number, and I bet it's even larger today. And I also think that it's like those are just running in production. Almost everybody we've seen has at least experimented with Kubernetes. Even very small startups are looking at Kubernetes as a platform, a foundation to build applications, whether that be custom applications or commercial off-the-shelf applications. So there's a large skill gap when learning Kubernetes, and I'll be talking a little bit about that later. So 95%, that's a pretty large number that they're seeing a pretty large skill gap with Kubernetes from their point of view. And almost everybody's running into major challenges with this. So and also I guess you'd say the operational or learning curve burden is felt among 51% of developers, because when you're a developer, there's always new technologies coming out and everything comes out at light speed. And, Kubernetes is another thing to know, but Kubernetes is, we'll be talking about why it's a very good foundation to build applications. So just briefly, I'd like to go into why we're seeing in our customer base, like given like all these challenges right here, like, if organizations weren't getting anything out of it, like why are they still going forward with it? So we typically see these reasons right here. This isn't on the slides, but the first thing that Kubernetes does, and this needed for a long time when the cloud came out, is it abstracts away infrastructure. So and it can be on any cloud, it can be on-prem, it can be wherever. There's very big value in that. So if you want a load balancer, you can just specify it in code, and it's not just with like any particular cloud. It can be on any cloud. So there's a big benefit in that. The way you deploy applications is the same everywhere. You also see with developer versatility. So what that would mean is like if you have one team and one set of applications running on Kubernetes, they would be able to jump to another team and be able to pick it up just the same, just because they already run Kubernetes. They won't have to learn ECS or any other type of runtime platform. So that's another reason why we see like a lot of customers gravitating towards it. And also for the ability to developers to be able to deploy, hey, I want a load balancer. I want a declarative state of infrastructure. I I want my applications to look like this. For them to be able to do that without like an operational team is really big. You also get the web scale features out of the box, everything that Google develops, like scaling, load balancing, self-healing, and declarative management to be able to bring out your infrastructure, say, hey, I want my applications and storage and networking and everything to look like this. And then Kubernetes just automatically makes it happen. You don't need to tell it what to build when. Another really large benefit that we see for our customers while they're going to Kubernetes and they're going through all these challenges is it's also a universal deployment platform. So we talked about custom software before, which is the case with a lot of organizations, but independent software vendors such as Splunk and others, they're able to deploy. They could just give you Kubernetes manifest files, and you're able to spin up and have an enterprise grade ready solution right away with just Kubernetes files. So it's a really good platform for that. And also, like when we get to the container side, we typically see a 40 to 50% reduction in infrastructure, being able to get rid of the hypervisor, which you would typically see with virtual machines. So those are like really the big things that why, like, even given all these challenges that that customers are moving to Kubernetes. So I'll take a pause there to see if there's any questions from the chat.
Okay. I'm not seeing any questions on my end just yet.
Okay. All right. Perfect. All right. So a little bit of background on Kubernetes. So I'd like to share a personal story. So I started with Kubernetes, I can't remember, 4 or 5 years ago, and I was a developer at the time, and my background came from the consulting space, and there was this Kubernetes thing. It was just a buzzword then, or not a buzzword. It was just a very experimental technology. But when I actually got to use it, I was like, oh my goodness, I got to deploy the experience that I got as a developer and got to was very good. And I got to like, wow, this is going to be the future. So I was able to build a web scale application with just one person, just myself, without needing a team of like 10 people and being able to, having to send out emails for and justifications. I need this server, or I need this networking policy set up, or I need this storage. I was just able to do that all on my own. And I immediately saw, I'm like, wow, this is like really cool. But and also the ability to be able to do it anywhere. So I'm not locked into any particular vendor, which is a very big plus. And I was like, wow, I really like this. But one of the challenges that I saw is, like, with Kubernetes, nobody does vanilla Kubernetes by themselves. It's always managed. This is because it's a very customizable platform. There's a lot of buttons and levers, and it doesn't come with enterprise configuration right out of the box. So, for example, when I was setting up security, it didn't have any roles for role-based authentication. It didn't have any of that. I didn't know enough about Kubernetes to know, hey, can I test this in production? I didn't know, like, hey, once I have this Kubernetes, how would I deploy it? How would I have this in my application delivery pipeline? And how would I watch this? So there was all these questions, but even despite all those, like, just the massive benefits that I had as from a technology and developer point of view, I knew it was worth it trying to figure out these questions. So development teams like myself, you want to be focusing on development and creating customer value. You don't want to be focusing on the infrastructure and processes to be able to do that. So what are the things that you would need for a successful container practice? Let's see our next slide here. Let's go back really quickly. So the first thing that you would need to have before we talk about accelerating Kubernetes adoption is, like, what actually goes in that. So the first thing that you would need is the ability to release code. So as we all know here, continuous integration is CI, and you need to be able to release code. You need to be able to build your application and put it somewhere. And then you'd also need to be able to actually deploy it. So whether that's either locally, that's in a development environment, or a QA environment, or staging or production environment. So you need to keep that piece in mind. You also need to be able to see, also with Kubernetes, and what we see with our customers, is the ability to be able to see what's going on. You need to be able to log. You need to be able to observe, like, to be able to log what's going on, to be able to see all of the metrics. What are the performance metrics? And to be able to see the end-to-end ability, to be able to be alerted. The other piece that you would need is security. So like with containers, since it's a distributed environment, security becomes a little more complicated. So what that would mean is, you have, the way Kubernetes works is, you have a lot of servers that you would join to a Kubernetes cluster without the need of a hypervisor. And containers you'd have a bunch of containers running on a server, and you don't want those one container's memory accessing another container's memory. And you'd also want the networking between all of the servers themselves to be secure. So there's a lot that goes into that. There's also, in terms of also on the application level, that level of security. You need to be able to secure your passwords and everything like that. You need to be able to make sure that the actual policies are those enforced. And the other thing that you would also need, also in a Kubernetes environment, is the ability to do reporting. So this could mean security reports and configuration recommendations, and then also the ability in an environment like Kubernetes, you'd want to make sure that all of your applications, like, is the resources actually being utilized correctly in a smart way. So let me go to the next slide and show what that is really quick. Give me one moment.
So,
yep, go ahead.
Before you move on, we've got a question. Someone wants to know, do containers have native file systems providing file locking for SQL or ACID operation, a middleware that is needed to perform read after, write, verify, or is it still a no file system?
Can you repeat that one more time? I just want to make sure I fully understand that question.
Yeah, I think it's a two-part question. So container does not have a native file system for providing file locking for SQL type ACID operation. So that's your first part of the question. And
Okay.
then a middleware will need to perform read and write verify. Is it still a no file system?
Yeah, so this question, if I could rephrase it, is, do containers have a native file system, and how does that actually work on the storage side? And especially in terms of a database. So a database, the way a database works is natively on a disk. It's a bunch of files, and you want to make sure that, like, when you're doing an update, that, like, it's not being read at the same time. So there's a lot of data contention, and a database manages all that. And how would containers actually be able to manage in an environment where you need to lock files and they all need to be distributed and things like that? So the answer to that is yes, containers actually can do that, and that's through something called volumes. And through these volumes is actually Kubernetes itself. I'm trying to remember the name of the technology, but there are distributed applications that you can deploy on Kubernetes that do this. There's a particular technology, I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it's basically MySQL made for Kubernetes. It's made to be horizontally scalable. I wish I could remember the name of that. But it's something that absolutely does work. So that's something that you can either run your own database, or you can go into a lot of vendors out there, or there's a lot of projects that have these types of databases built and optimized for Kubernetes. So I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, feel free to post it back in the chat. Are there any other questions about containers and Kubernetes before we talk about the ideal solution? Like, as a developer, what is the experience you would want? That's what we're going to go into next.
No questions yet.
Awesome. Yeah, feel free to post any other related questions. So actually, I do see one here. It says how to handle better continuous integration, CI/CD, to achieve faster application delivery. Organizations often have to adopt CI/CD practices, which involve automating the build, testing, and deployment processes. Yes, so we're actually going to talk about that in a little bit later, but that's something that you absolutely do need. So we'll be talking a little bit about that, and that's a very complicated topic that goes into the DevOps space, but we'll be addressing that. So thank you. Any other questions? Feel free to post them in the Q&A. We'll be happy to answer. So the next, so as a developer, like what I would want as a developer or someone on a technical team per se, the ideal solution is for me is I would want something that, like, in a Kubernetes environment where, since, as we know, we talked about before, like, given all those benefits, like, Kubernetes is a very solid foundation to build an application on, given its versatility and its features and the direction that the whole entire market is going. So you'd want, I as a developer, speaking outside of Mirantis and outside of my role as a solutions architect, but as a developer, I'd want something that, like, I'd want some kind of solution that where all I do is I commit code and I have some mechanism or something that tests my code and then pushes it automatically to production. And with CI/CD pipelines, that's what we refer to as CI/CD, continuous integration and continuous deployment. And also another thing I would want is I would want the ability to, I want to not be able to have to figure out the tool set and everything that goes into that, because that can be very complicated, because CI/CD pipelines, they can either be too prescriptive, like they're too opinionated on how the creator of them say, hey, this is how you should deploy your code. When I know, as a developer and having assisted a lot of developers around a lot of organizations, it looks completely different. Some of them have code scans. They all have radically different higher level environments. But you don't want something that's like too custom either, where it's like it's too, like, you're actually writing a whole entire CI/CD tool set yourself. So ideally, you'd want something in the middle. And also you'd want to, as a developer, you don't want to figure out all the tool set around Kubernetes. You wouldn't want to figure out how to do, the observability. You'd want that to be handled either by a tool, ideally by tools and an operations team. You'd want security. You'd want to know exactly, you'd want something that's secure right out of the box. And it'd be also nice to have, like, reports on, hey, is Kubernetes configured correctly? Are the resources, is everything on Kubernetes, like, are the resources that I allocated for this app, are we over allocated or under allocated? Things like that. So all I would want to do, a developer, is just press a button, push code, and it gets deployed to this foundation Kubernetes, and everything just works. That's what I would want as a developer. That'd be the ideal solution. So what since we at Mirantis, we work with a lot of these types of customers. So we get to observe what's going on with these teams, like, what are most people doing, what's common, what do they really want to work on, and what is the stuff that they want to offload. So that's as I was talking about what Mirantis does and what we do for our customers before, is we like to refer to that as the ZeroOps or zero operations experience. So as a developer, you're just focusing on the developing code and all of the operations and everything around that, best practices and recommendations. All that is done for you in a way that's not too prescriptive, but also customizable as well. So what we did at Mirantis was we did. Sorry, give me 1 second. So what we did at Mirantis was we have a lot of data on what enterprises large and small are doing, and we put it into a bundle we like to call Lens Autopilot. So what Lens Autopilot is, it's a product slash service where we took all of the best practices that we have with our Kubernetes engineers and what we see out in the field and what most people are doing, and we combined them into an opinionated platform that runs on top of Kubernetes that gives you a Kubernetes ecosystem right out of the box with many different types of elements. So that to be able to build something like this, I know if I was to do it on my own, this would take me months or years going out onto the CNCF Foundation and looking at all the tools and researching what they are and then testing them. We did that. We did that for you, for our customers in Lens Autopilot. We have a question right here. Container is a good scale up with a cluster of computers. The overhead of communications between the pods is not small. If an application can fit inside of one VM, can a container offer any value in this case? In this type of case, what this question is referring to is if you just have an application on one VM, would there be any benefits to containerization at all? And let me think about that question for a second, because like with the performance benefits of question is basically that without the performance benefits of that containerization brings, why would we move to containers? I could speak to that from a developer point of view. The first reason that comes to mind for that is the ecosystem. So when you take a look at, and when I refer to, and the other question is 5 times, how do we achieve that and what does that mean? We'll come to that question later. So this question refers to without the performance benefits of Kubernetes, what benefits would you get? And I was referred to the ecosystem. So all of the big tools out there, all of the CI/CD tools, the observability tools, the portability, and just the overall DevOps flow that you get with is more conducive to containers than it is VMs. Like I see most of the ecosystem, everything is going in the containers direction, and also the function as a service. But for long running workloads, you'd be doing on containers, and I see the ecosystem being built around that. So just the benefits of all the tools and all the developer and all the community and where open source is going, I see it going in the direction of containers more than VMs. So that's the first benefit that comes to mind. If there's any else that comes to mind, big ones that come to mind, I'll be sure to answer that. So just a quick question, Jared, can we leave up the 5 times? What is 5? How do you achieve that? And what does 5 times mean? We'll talk about that a little later. Please leave that question up. I'd like to save that for the end into exactly what that means. Let's see if we have any other questions. We also have in the chat, I cannot read any questions. So there's a chat tab and there's also a Q&A tab. And the Q&A tab is where you would click for reading the questions. So this question we answered. Let me go back to the question. So before we get, this is a good lead-in for the 5 times. So let me return back to where we were before. So we worked with a lot of customers, and we got to see what they have, and we also have containerization experts. And to be able to set up this ecosystem by yourself would take a massive amount of time, given all the elements that you would want for a true Kubernetes production-ready ecosystem. So that I know myself, you'd have to go out and you have to research on the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. You'd have to find out what you don't know what you don't know. So you have to find out exactly what you don't know. You'd have to research the tools to see what's out there, what they do, and then you'd have to test them, and then you'd have to make them into production. Like that's a very big task. And I know myself, like just being a developer, I wouldn't, that would take a long time. And then B, I'd want to just be building code or adding value to my organization. So there's a huge time investment. And then not only that, with all those tools, you'd also need to get your teams invested and also educated on all of these as well. So that's typically the barrier that we see to adopting Kubernetes. And so we'll be talking about that. So we built a platform called Lens Autopilot, where we took a lot of those practices and we give a Kubernetes ecosystem. And these are a couple of those elements, and we'll be speaking into what that is. And we basically, what we've done for customers is we take all of these elements and we deploy it on their Kubernetes clusters, and we keep it updated for them while also being able to customize it. So a few of those elements, what I was mentioning before, is you'd want something to do the code release. You'd want a CI/CD tool. You want to be able to see what's going on. You want to be able to make sure everything's secure. Like, are your policies enforced? Are secrets encrypted? Do you have a role-based access control? Are you scanning your images for vulnerabilities? And then you'd also need some reporting. So just speaking in just a little bit. So what we found with CI/CD is what we were mentioning before is what developers would typically want is you'd want a tool. And what we found with our customers is they really like GitHub Actions. So what we do with Lens Autopilot, to be able to address that, we give them a partially customized GitHub Actions and be able to release code. But if we were to write the customers' pipelines for them, that'd be a little bit too much, because each development environment is just so custom. And then you'd want to be able to deploy the application. And to be able to do that, you'd want a tool. We went out and we found that the best practices are using Argo CD and also Flux. On the observability side, we found you need another tool, Loki, to be able to observe logs, and you'd also want Prometheus and to be able to gather metrics from Kubernetes, and Grafana to display them, and the ability to be able to also alert as well. So that's what we found is customers don't really want to set up these types of tools. Finding out what these tools are, customizing them, and setting them up. And to be able to do that from scratch takes a really long time. And with Lens Autopilot is just we've gathered a lot of data and our opinion on how this should look and work for most customers. So that's typically how we accelerate around. And what we typically see is the actual adoption rate that the ability to set all this up, we typically see, and I think later we'll be talking about use cases. We typically see about a 5 times adoption rate with having Lens Autopilot versus doing this completely scratch from yourself. The other piece I'd like to speak really quickly to is the security. So like being able to do this from scratch, there's so much that goes into Kubernetes security. So what we do is we built in an image scanner and also a role-based access control scanner to be able to make sure that, hey, is your Kubernetes, like, are all the rules and everything you built, is everything, are there no vulnerabilities there? In your actual images for your applications, are there any common vulnerabilities, and to be able to alert them? And then also, like with Kubernetes, like you have a lot of containers running, and these are emulated operating systems, and you'd want to be alerted, like, hey, like, are these hacked into live, or is there anyone running a live shell? So we constantly went out there and we found a tool called Falco to be able to do this. And so one thing we also do with Lens Autopilot is we constantly research all the tools out there, and we're constantly baking them in to be able to give the best Kubernetes ecosystem experience. Are there any questions on what goes into a Kubernetes environment? take a quick look at the chat there. No other questions. The last piece I'd like to be able to speak to is what we've observed with customers and what they're looking for is also on the reporting side. So this comes into three elements. The first element is the security element, which we mentioned before, is to be able to scan your Kubernetes cluster and the images and be able to report on what are potential vulnerabilities. The other is configuration recommendations. So Kubernetes is organizations just operating Kubernetes without even the ecosystem. There's a lot of buttons and levers for setting that up and configuring it just from a recommendations point of view. And we use something called KubeBench that we use for our customers. They can go out there and all of these are open source tools, by the way. We just set up and we configure them, and that's how we accelerate the adoption rate. So we use something called KubeBench to be able to recommend that. And the other piece is the allocation piece. So Kubernetes, as you know, it has its own resource allocator, but sometimes it can over provision or under provision. So there's a open source tool out there called Goldilocks, and we configure that and we set that up for customers to be able to run on their own Kubernetes to be able to use it right away. So I'll take a pause there. So as you can see, like what developers are looking for are DevOps-as-a-service. So like as a developer, I would want like all these practices and all these tools set up with like a push of the button. And this is what we've delivered on customers' Kubernetes that we keep updated for them. And typically what we also see is with whether you do these practices on your own or you use Lens Autopilot, typically you need dedicated expertise and staff to be able to do that. So what we saw with Lens Autopilot is we give a bucket of service hours for customers to be able to massage this into their ecosystem. So they could use that for example, writing CI/CD pipelines. We have some customers that, hey, we actually need a little more help writing those ourselves. So we typically see a service buck hours for that. And then also for customizing any one of these components here. So everything is batteries included, but swappable. So we typically see customers have an autopilot for many different types of environments, whether it's QA or production. So we also have, we typically see customers that need help with customizing each one of those. So any questions?
I'm not seeing any new questions.
No other questions. Awesome. So just to recap here, I probably should have jumped back to this. So this is just the back end of what we've seen customers like. What we basically make Lens Autopilot what customers want to use, and they want to build upon enterprise ready, open source, and everything ready to go. And behind the scenes, this is what we customize for customers. And what we were talking about before the questions, we typically see a 5 to 10 times increase in application development speed because you have all the security scanners, a reduction in vulnerabilities, and also with Kubernetes, you also see a reduction in operational costs, and that coming from the code speed deployment to having all these enterprise tools, which is Kubernetes is basically an excavator as opposed to a shovel. Like before, you do a lot of this manually, and we typically see a big cost reduction in organizations. And I think we have a case study that we'll be able to talk about that. So what we typically see with a platform like this is we typically see a 4-week adoption as opposed to something that could be a year or even longer. So this is the experience that we've seen with Lens Autopilot. The first week is we see what's out there. We set up the first week we set up monitoring and security alerts, and then we do some assessments. And then we do some recommendations, and then we actually implement the service on customers' Kubernetes clusters, and then we do monitoring and continuous security, and that's how we get it massaged in. So for a month to be able to do this is really quickly. I know if I was to do this on myself or by a team by myself, so it would be like a lot of research in a year, and that's typically where we see the biggest value for a ZeroOps experience. So what we found is one of our customers here is Choosel that uses Lens Autopilot, and one of the big things that they, there's a lot of reasons to have like to adopt a Kubernetes ecosystem as opposed to build one. And one of the big things that they saw is they saw it as like an insurance plan. So when you go out and you're building these ecosystems, you don't know what you don't know. And we have a lot of feedback from customers and also the Docker and container expertise. So they saw it as like an insurance plan in the sense of like, hey, is there a component for Kubernetes that we're likely to need? And this brings in an opinion of what you're likely to use. So that's what they really liked about having a baked-in solution while also being built upon open source and everything like that. So it's not a proprietary solution at all. So any questions before we conclude? We're running on 40 minutes. We have a question here. No, we don't have a demo right here. That would be very long and involved. That's something that if you go on our website, you can fill out a form and we'll be able to do a demo for you, or maybe we can do that in another webinar. Any other questions before we conclude? Awesome. So just to conclude with what we talked about today was we talked about what Kubernetes was, why organizations are adopting it, what are the challenges with it, and why, given all those challenges, why organizations at such a high rate are still moving forward. We talked a little bit about what goes into a Kubernetes ecosystem. And then we talked a little bit about like what we've done with all that data and built it in Lens Autopilot, and which is a enterprise-ready configured Kubernetes ecosystem that runs on top of open source platforms that you can deploy on top of your own Kubernetes cluster. And the value of that would be not having to research, install, or configure any of the large components that we discussed here. Reducing the risk in missing something. And then also, most importantly, as Mirantis, we're not just a product and services. We like to be able to partner and be a partner in the process and taking on the operational complexity of the Kubernetes ecosystem. So that's what we like to think of as Lens Autopilot is just a head start to get there. But we love working with our customers and being a partner and shoulder to shoulder with them with containerization and all the challenges that go with that. So that is all we have. Let me see. I think I see a chat question there. So I'll hand the baton back to Jared. Thank you all for your time, and feel free to post any questions there. And yeah, thank you for your time.
All right. That was outstanding. Thank you, Zach. Thank you for sharing all your expertise with us about your CI/CD, your pipelines, and your Kubernetes. Just a quick reminder that today's session was recorded. Following this panel, you should receive a link to view the on-demand recording. And you can also go to our devops.com/webinars website. You can look in the on-demand section. It'll also be waiting for you there as well. And just as a reminder, I did mention that I was going to be giving away 4 $25 gift cards for Amazon. The winners that we've got are Kathy S., Lucas K., Vlad O., and Brandy P. Congratulations to the 4 of you. Please keep an eye out on your inbox. If it doesn't show up in your inbox, be sure to check your spam folder. Zach, again, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Just want to make sure you don't have any final remarks before we close out.
No final remarks. Thank you for everybody's time.
All right. Then I also want to thank Mirantis for sponsoring today's webinar. I'd also like to thank each of you, our audience, for being with us the entirety of today's presentation. You will see a short survey up on your screen here as soon as we close out. Please take a few minutes just to answer those questions for us. Thank you. Have a great day, and I will be signing out.